Story 1. I grew up in a small Midwestern town in a state largely comprised of flat farmland. If you took the old highway east of town, maybe 607 miles, you could take a left on a gravel road, and about a mile into that, you would just barely see a trail leading farther into the plot. Up here, most trees outside of towns are used for shelter against the wind since the state is so flat. So with the length of the trail and the trees bunched up, the long-ass grass didn't help. Around any buildings, you wouldn't see what was back there if you only drove by. But of course, most of us kids knew there was an old abandoned house back there. So a lot of teenagers went exploring and reported backstories. The rumor was that maybe in the 70s, a man killed his wife and kid in that house, and then himself. This, of course, was the story running around the high school anyway, so it isn't exactly reliable. But it was enough to get the gears going, you know? Kind of like a local ghost story that was all ours. And since I was super into ghosts at the time, and still am, but not in a sexual way or anything, it was enough to get my imagination running. I think the year was 1999, and I was working at the local McDonald's. Teens often took the closing shifts, and a lot of us would hang out at the lake after close, or find something to do together. One night, we decided to gather a posse to go out and explore this house, so we bought some flashlights from the gas station and headed out. It was just about 1 a.m. when our 9-person group got to the trail. I can't remember exactly how far back the actual buildings were, but it seemed like a long way, and you definitely couldn't see anything else but fields. The first structure we saw was a little lean-to with a tarp flapping. Then as you turned a corner, a barn and a house. Now, I would never claim to be some incredibly brave man, but I will admit that walking through the barn by myself was actually sort of calming, but still in a bit of an unnerving way. The entire back wall of the barn was gone, so you were looking out across a moonlit wheat field. Just a cool scene that I wish I could have taken a picture of. The house was not as calming. First, tons of deviants had already been here, and they had spray-painted words all over. Some dirty words here and there, but also stuff about reading your Bible and random religious phrases that made it kind of creepy, especially at night. Right after you enter the doorway, stairs are going down to the left, which lead down to a landing and then turn for a few steps. We went down to the landing to check it out, but the floor was flooded at least a foot, but closer to 2. The main floor was pretty messed up, with the walls ripped out and graffiti all over. But the layout wasn't without its charm. You could picture a family living there. The stairs going up were above those going down and led to a small upstairs room. There were a few kids' shoes laying around, along with some books. What spooked us at first was the blood that was splattered by the window, but we would later learn that some other friends had shot a raccoon there. Eventually, we made our way downstairs and heard some rustling in the trees nearby, so started quickly making our way out of the door. Now, I don't know what was happening, but somehow the line out of the door got held up, and my friend Chris and I were the last two, right near the downstairs hall. I looked down at one point as someone accidentally aimed a flashlight and saw an arm with a red sleeve extending up to the landing, and briefly, a brown shoe stepping up. The line had unjammed at this point, and we had all raced to the vehicles to get the hell out of there. Chris had made an unfortunate wrong turn out of the door and into some trees full of spider webs. He ran back, and we got the hell out of there, and later I found out that Chris saw the same thing. We thought maybe it was just some guy, but we went downstairs when we got there and didn't see anything. Plus, you probably would have heard somebody sloshing around in the water. That bothered us both for some time, and we do talk about it occasionally. Story 2. My stepdad found our puppy Eddie on the side of the road. Someone had thrown him out of a moving car, and he had broken legs, broken teeth, a swollen and closed eye, and was severely dehydrated. My stepdad took him to the vet and paid quite a bit of money for surgeries to get Eddie fixed up. He got attached to the doggo, so we ended up adopting him. After that, even though he was the family dog, he was best buds with my stepdad. Anywhere my stepdad was around the house, you could find Ed tagging along. Eddie and I grew up together. He died while I was in college, and my parents buried him in a pet cemetery. Since it was sort of sudden and I was far away, I didn't get to say goodbye. A few months after that, I had a dream where Eddie comes and finds me. His hair is matted and dirty, and his flesh looks kind of rotted, but he's wagging his tail and seems happy to see me again. Eddie starts leading me down a hazy path, and the farther we go, the faster his tail wags. Finally, we get to this giant wall of mist that extends across the entire horizon and rises higher than I can see. Eddie gets real close to it before trotting back to me. He licks my hand, gives me a couple of nose boops, and whines a little. Then he turns around again and starts to do that happy dog prance toward the wall until he finally passes through it. I can sort of see his outline jumping up and down excitedly next to a human-shaped figure. I jog after Eddie and reach my hand out to touch the wall, hoping I'll be able to pass through it too. That's when my cell phone rings in real life, waking me up. When I answer it, my mom is on the other end crying. My stepdad had just died of a heart attack. Story 3. It happened to me 7 years ago, and I can't figure it out, but I lost an hour in what felt to me like minutes. At the time, I was working from home after a serious illness diagnosis. I had settled into a routine, up at 7 a.m. and do house stuff and shower, then at 8 a.m. start prepping my work and laying out my day. Phone calls and emails from 8, 9. This is all I remember. It was 7:55 and I brewed a cup of Keurig coffee in my kitchen located on the main floor of my house. I went upstairs to my office and turned on my computer to settle in and realized I forgot the coffee in the kitchen. I went back downstairs and got the coffee as soon as I realized I forgot it. Couldn't have been more than the time it took Windows to boot up, but I took a sip and the coffee was cold. Not warm, but cold. I thought my Keurig was broken, but I looked at the clock and it said 9:14. So whereas I expected it to be 8:05 max, somehow an hour and 10 minutes passed without explanation. It was very bothersome. I have no idea where that hour went. I have never had any blackout before or since, no seizures. And the meds I was on shouldn't have caused a lapse like that. I don't think I fell asleep because I distinctly remember typing my password and saying out loud, "Shit, I forgot the coffee." It kind of left me uneasy a bit. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before or since. Story 4. I was 10 years old. It was a Sunday morning between 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. My mother was in the kitchen preparing lunch. As she was washing the veggies, the water pressure from the tap started to fluctuate. Water would flow, stop flowing like someone was playing around with the tap. My mom asked out loud who was messing with the water pressure. The valve for the water tank was just outside my house, and my dad went to inspect it and I followed him. Nothing was out of place. As we walked back into the house, we saw before our very eyes bloody chicken claw prints emerge one by one. It's like a chicken with bloodied feet walking through the hall, except there was no chicken. Freaked me the fuck out. But we were just stunned and stood there staring as one footprint emerged after another. There were about 5 or 6 claw prints in all before it stopped. Everyone in my family saw it. We didn't discuss it immediately. My parents just wiped the claw prints off. What made this even worse was the fact that it occurred during a very turbulent period in my household. My mom had schizophrenia, but at that point she wasn't diagnosed yet. She heard voices in her head, hostile voices, and was convinced that there was a grand conspiracy against her and that people were planning to kidnap me and my sister. She didn't trust my father, her mother, and her siblings. So when something legitimately paranormal happens, it just fucks everything up. Like in a world where bloody chicken prints appear, why wouldn't there be some occult conspiracy? Those few months were the most traumatic of my childhood. My mom was admitted into a psychiatric facility a few weeks later after being diagnosed with schizophrenia. But dealing with her paranoia and violent outbursts against everyone, not her children, broke my world. Part of me even believed her. Having some legit paranormal shit happening in the middle of the day didn't help at all. 17 years on, she is still on medication, but she is stable and fully functional, even when she was going through the worst of her schizophrenic episodes. She was never neglectful, always loving towards her children and always dutiful, but she was overprotective during those times. I was afraid that I'd get schizophrenia because it is somewhat hereditary. My mom's sister became quite unstable a couple of years ago. To complete the double jeopardy of insanity, my dad's sister also had paranoia, and her son was admitted for a manic episode. So this propensity for psychotic disorders on both sides of the family tree has made me pretty resolute on not getting married and having kids. Story 5. I was 19, driving around town with a friend sometime after midnight, talking shit and listening to music. We drive past this road with a signpost to an area neither of us heard of, despite both of us living in town our whole lives. I asked if she wanted to see where the road went, and she said yes, so I pull a U-turn and off we go. It's a paved road with heavy trees on each side and a few houses. Nothing unusual for either of us. I was living on a street like that at the time. Anyway, within about 5 minutes, the conversation just kind of dies off. And a few minutes after that, I start to get an uneasy feeling. Then we passed a kangaroo on the side of the road. It remained perfectly still, just turning its head to watch us drive past, and I got the distinct impression it was standing guard. After that, I just got more and more anxious. I ended up turning to my friend and saying, "This is going to sound stupid, but can you—" She was already taking her seatbelt off. "I'll lock the back doors." We kept following the road even after that because we're stubborn bitches and don't know when to admit defeat. It was at least half an hour because my 60-minute cassette tape had flipped over twice, between pulling onto the paved road and coming to a sign saying dirt road ahead. By this stage, I felt physically sick and my skin was crawling. Without a word, I did the quickest 3-point turn I was able to do, and we headed back down the road. The closer we got back to the turnoff, the better I felt until we were back on the main road, where I felt like I could breathe easily again. We told a few people about it and got brushed off mostly. We didn't even drive past that turnoff without flinching or shuddering for a few months. The feeling of dread had been that strong. Then about 6 months later, she turns to me out of nowhere and said, "Let's drive it during the day." So we went. My friend has both her phone and mine on her lap with emergency numbers punched in. We're playing upbeat pop music to try and keep us calm. It took us less than 5 minutes to reach the dirt road, and on checking the odometer, the paved section was only 1 kilometer long. Once again, we got the fuck out of there. Have never been back. No idea what the hell was going on that night. But I can say with certainty that we were not meant to be there. Even 20 years later, if someone mentions the area on the signpost, we shudder, and recently, I turned to her out of nowhere and said, "Hey, was that you with me on the road where—" Yes, and I don't want to talk about it. Story 6. Thought I was dreaming, but it was either an out-of-body experience or me being possessed by a demon. When I was 12, I woke up sometime after dawn and had a strong urge to call for help. So I got up and started going down to my parents' room. I get to the stairs and feel extreme cold in my body, turn around and look into the bathroom. The doors were open. And see this white tall thing with something that resembled an onion for its head with 2 holes where the eyes should be. It had freakishly long limbs as well. At this point, I'm like, "Nah." I always react sarcastically, it helps me relieve myself, and started running to my parents' room and felt this thing following me behind. I get to my parents and start screaming right next to my mother, trying to wake her up. But she didn't budge, even though she was quite a light sleeper. I didn't turn around, but it felt like something was dragging me with great force, and suddenly I was back in my bed. I remember being teleported all the way downstairs back to my room. This repeated 4 more times, with that thing appearing closer and closer to my parents' room, like it was blocking me but giving me just enough space to run next to it before it gives chase. After the 5th time, I felt infuriated and took a golf club sitting in a bag in the hallway and thought to myself that if I see this thing again, I will proceed to slam it till I was sure it suffered a great deal and died. Except for this time, I got to my parents' room without trouble and didn't see a thing. That is when both of my parents woke up and saw me there standing with a 5-iron shaking, holding it in a position that looked like I was going to bludgeon them to death. I did end up at the psychiatrist afterward, but he said I'm a perfectly normal boy and these nightmares should go away soon. Years later, I'm still trying to make sense of this, but I think I must have stopped breathing in my sleep or that something else was wrong. And this was my brain's way of telling me to wake the fuck up and seek help by making the most intense sleep paralysis of my life. I've had plenty of them before and after this event, and I was accustomed to them. Story 7 happened about 2 years ago near Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My wife and I were visiting a friend that went to school there. We were looking for things to do, and he mentioned there was an abandoned insane asylum nearby. As a photographer, I was intrigued, so we decided to go the next day since it was late at night, and none of us had the guts to go when it was dark. The next day at around 11 a.m., we decided to head over to this abandoned insane asylum and check it out. All we knew was that a lot of frats and sororities did a lot of hazing type stuff there, so we figured it'd be fun checking it out. Once we arrived, we had to park and walk down a long driveway due to a gate with a no trespassing sign posted. This asylum dated back to Civil War times. Back then, it had to be self-sustaining. So on either side of us were dead cornfields, so there was nothing but fields on either side. As we got to the front of the building, we heard the sound of banging metal on metal. We chopped it up to the wind and continued. Once we stepped into the front lobby, we noticed a significant drop in temperature. It was about 80 degrees outside, but inside it felt as if it was in the 50s. We immediately felt heavy energy, so we decided to walk around the outskirts of the different corridors of the building instead. We checked out the crematory, dining hall, and a few living quarters, and then we found ourselves back in the front lobby. Once we stepped inside, that heavy energy was back. We hadn't felt it at any of the other corridors we visited and wanted to go back again. We decided to leave, but my friend wanted to see if we could get upstairs. I hesitantly agreed to check it out. The stairs were in bad shape and seemed like there was no way they would support our body weight, so we decided to head back to the car. As we were walking back to the main lobby, my wife and friend were already out of the front door. I had my camera out and was getting a few last shots. When I looked down the hallway to my left, I saw a man in an old tuxedo walking towards me with his head down. He was quite large and had an old cap on. I immediately yelled to run and was yelling, "There's a man in a tuxedo?" As we ran back to the car, my friend asked if I seriously saw something or was just messing around. As he said that, I looked at him, and over his shoulder, the same man was walking towards us, but from the dead cornfield about 50 yards away from us, coming from our immediate left. When we got back to the car, we looked behind us and saw nothing. Being from Houston, I've seen plenty of homeless people doing plenty of wild things. But when I saw this man walking towards us, I felt like I was in immediate danger of something very evil. When we got back to his dorm, we Googled the place to see if there were any stories of paranormal events. Sure enough, other people had reported that they had been chased off the property by a very dark, large figure of a man that seemed to teleport supernaturally. Still freaks me out to wonder what would have happened if we went up the stairs. Would this man have gotten between us and the only entrance/exit to the building? Story 8. This story is a mixture of my personal experiences and my mom's. This all took place in about 6 months when we moved out to go back to our hometown. I was in 2nd grade when my family moved to Texarkana, Arkansas, so that my dad could attend a police academy or SWAT school or something I don't remember exactly. Anyways, we moved into this older home, but was plenty nice for me. The layout was a bit strange in my opinion. You walk into the kitchen from the carport, and directly to the left is a pantry, and next to that was my bedroom. Through my bedroom, you could reach the master bedroom, and through that room, the other room that could go to the 3rd bedroom. They were all connected with access to the living room or kitchen. Weird. So my room was the 1st bedroom and was pretty small, but it was mine and I loved it. We previously lived in a small single wide, which was cramped for my parents, 2 sisters, and myself. Well, I loved my room initially, but I remember liking it less and less each day. I began to get scared of that room. I would go in it to play with my toys, but only with the door open, and I would sit just in the doorway. My parents repainted my room for me to try to help me like it more. Bright yellow. No idea why that color. It didn't help. In a desperate, loving attempt to help me, my parents gave me the big master BR, and they took my little room. Cool. But the master BR had no windows. WTF. I don't know how long I had been staying in the room, but one night I woke up in the middle of the night. No windows. Pitch fucking black. No bueno for a 7-year-old or however old I was in 2nd grade. I woke up to the pitch black and instantly had this horrible feeling. Chills. The feeling that I was being watched from the blackness. Being watched from the darkness of my room. I pulled the covers over my head and just waited. I could feel the presence of something evil standing right beside my bed. Now I'm not super religious, but I do believe in God. I remember laying there praying that if I did that night, if I would go to heaven. I repeated it over and over and over, just waiting for the end. I was terrified. I said that till I fell asleep and woke up the next morning. That was my encounter. My mom told me later about her experiences. I'll make it quick. She would be in the back doing whatever and hear a thump. Go in the living room and a candle would have fallen off of the coffee table. Put it back, go back to whatever, and hear it again. Go back. Candle on the floor. Freak out. Get gun. Call my granddad. Clear house. Clear. Clueless. Stuff like that. Our lights in the house at one point began to flicker quite a bit. The parents called an electrician who came and went into the attic to investigate. The dude came down looking white as a ghost. Would not tell my mom what he saw, but said he would never come back to that house. That's really about it that we encountered that we remember. Mom said when we moved it, she found an Ouija board in the closet. Moved out of the house, and within a month, it burned to the ground. Story 9. When my dad was at our home for hospice care and was down to his last few hours with us, we had a lot of people come to say goodbye, and my brother was there with his sons. His youngest was about a year and a half old. He was worn out from all the company, and my sister-in-law had put him down for a nap in my parents' bedroom. Our house is very small, so the hospital bed was in the living room, where we had the most room. I was at the head of the bed, stroking Dad's hair as he passed, surrounded by all of us. No one was in the bedroom where my nephew was asleep. Right when Dad passed, my nephew woke up from his nap crying with so much sad emotion that we could tell it wasn't an "I woke up alone and scared" type of crying. Years later, my sister's little girl finds a pair of older style glasses in the heavier styled frames like my dad used to wear. She was at a garage sale just digging around when she found them. She, of course, tries them on and goes to show my sister, but she only half paid attention because she was talking with my mom. She turns to me to model the glasses and says, "Look, now I look like Popo." My sister and mom turn around and said, "What?" She said it again, that she looks like Popo. My dad passed away almost 4 years before she was born, and at age 3, I don't think she had seen any of the few photos we had of him. We asked her about him, and she said she sometimes sees him. I admit to feeling jealous when she and my nephews would tell us they had seen Popo. I miss my dad terribly and had often wished that I could see him, especially since he passed at the home I have since inherited. I also lost my mom and wish I could see her as well. I don't dream of them nearly as much as I would like to. Maybe I am wishing for it too hard and should let it happen naturally. One last bit. When I was helping my fiancé, now husband, move his stuff from Austin to our city, we were finished and traveling back late at night. It had been an exhausting time, packing and moving everything from a 2-floor apartment, and my fiancé was wiped out but trying to drive. I had never tried driving anything as large as the U-Haul we were using, and our cell phones were not modern models like now with internet and maps. I have a terrible sense of direction and was worried I would get us lost on the last leg home. But my fiancé was drowsing off, so I took over the drive, saying a prayer to St. Christopher to get us home safe and asking my dad to guide us. I don't know if it was wishful thinking or not, but in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could see my fiancé slumped in the seat by the door, fast asleep. Next to him, though, if I turned only slightly and used my peripheral vision, it looked a little foggy, but I could see a shape. I know it wasn't my fiancé because he wasn't sitting up straight, and the figure I saw sat differently and looked like it had a ball cap that I could see a bit of the brim on. Dad always wore those types of caps. I do feel it was my dad, come to make sure his little onion head, his little quail, would make it home safely. I didn't get lost and managed to find my way home and felt a lot more confident maneuvering the huge U-Haul than I thought I would. I do believe he was there for me, but have not seen him again. But I still wish for one more time.